Turns out I was recording, and I was talking, and then I realized that I hadn't hit like the record button, so I was just talking for a few minutes, and noticed, and I found I wasn't actually recording. Anyways, back to the video. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Wrapped this one up a few minutes ago, well, a few minutes before the initial waste of time recording that I had to delete. That didn't happen, Um, but yeah, I thought to do a five things video. But before we jump into it, just in case you haven't read the book or you don't know the author, Daniel Keyes wrote the book, an American, I think he was a professor. He's passed now, sadly. Um, the book is probably one of his most popular books. Turns out it's the only book I actually know by him. I don't know any of his other books, but I suppose there are some. Uh, it was initially released as a short story in the 50s, late 50s, I think, and later adapted into like a long form novel in early 60s or mid 60s. I mean, I did check this before I read the book, but I don't remember, but I think it was the 60s. Um, yeah, I think the story also won the Hugo and the Nebula Awards at the time, so the critics actually thought it was good. Um, yeah, the book is a sci-fi novel, and it tells the story of Charlie Gordon, who is like a mentally disabled man, and he undergoes like an experimental surgery to sort of like increase his intelligence. And the book sort of explores like what happens to him after the surgery, how did the surgery impact his life, was he better off before the surgery or after it, was it all worth it, and lots of other stuff. So like themes of human nature, intelligence, empathy, I think was really the important one, and sort of like the pursuit of knowledge or the pursuit of like the betterment of our lives, if that's a way to put it. Yeah. So what did we learn? Yeah, the idea of being like careful about what you want. Nothing I think encapsulates this more than that word encapsulate. Encapsulates. I don't know where it came from. I feel like it just popped into my head and I just blurted it out. I hope it applies in this context. But yeah, nothing encapsulates this more than a quote from the book that goes something like, "I don't know what's worse, to know what you are and be happy, or to become what you've always wanted and to feel alone." I feel like I butchered this quote, but it goes something like that. Um, so it's this idea that we have, like, at every moment in our lives, we're always like looking ahead or like trying to better ourselves in one way or the other. But somehow, in that quest for betterment, there's a value that we're losing in the present by not being able to appreciate what we have. It's sad in some ways, or it's crazy in some ways, because I'm saying this about a character who is mentally disabled, and I guess you could ask, what is there to appreciate about the state of being mentally disabled? Um, but yeah, like the way the book plays out, it goes on to a point where you're like asking, well, is this all worth it? Like, what exactly is like the benefit in all of this? But anyways, I think that's like my second point. But in this initial point, I think some backstory, like the protagonist undergoes some surgery to increase his intelligence, and when this happens, there's like a serious internal struggle that he faces, and when he had mental disability, like for example, everyone would treat him awfully, and this had no lasting effect on him because at the time his memory was terrible and he never really held on to like any animosity or like negative emotions for more than a few minutes. And I would say that as a result of this, you would consider him to be like relatively happy. However, when he gets his memories back, he becomes intelligent. He All those negative emotions that he would like forget all of a sudden just start weighing him down so much that his life just becomes like this goop of like, I don't know, feeling sad and like just ruminating about like sad things that are happening to him or that happened to him. And it's just like living in this endless state of like PTSD. Um, but yeah, it like sort of like raises profound questions about the nature of happiness. Like, is and the price that we pay for like personal growth. Is it worth getting all you ever wanted if it means being alone? Like, I think that was a really important question that the book asked, and it doesn't really give you a clear answer one way or the other. I don't think it should, because it's a book. I like books that like sort of like pose questions and sort of like lets the reader sort of like think about them. Anyways, that's the first point. Second thing is the idea of like responsibility. There's the overused Spider-Man quote. I don't know if it's an actual Spider-Man quote, but it's the one about with great power comes great responsibility. Whoever said it first, I think the book touches on that in some way. Um, so like I don't know, I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and the host was talking about his story that happened to him as a kid, where he was watching a show with his dad and his uncle, and his uncle was sort of like laughing too hard at the show, laughing harder than the joke or the show called for. And his uncle was just sort of like in an ecstatic state, which was like beyond normal, right? And the host was saying that he remembers his dad calling him to the side, and was saying stuff like, "See your uncle over there? See how happy he is? See how everything in the world makes him happy, and he's always so happy and joyous. That's because he is in some ways very ignorant." And he was trying to tell his son that, well, you can be like him, you could always be as happy as he is, but or you could choose to open a book and gain knowledge, but then you risk the potential of not being as happy as he is. So that's an option or that's a choice that you have to make. Knowledge and potential sadness, or ignorance and happiness. Yeah, I think I butchered this, but in some way, I think it sort of relates to this in some ways, where it's like Charlie worked in a bakery, and at some point after getting smarter, he realizes his colleagues were stealing from their boss, who has been very good to them. And they've been doing this all along with him being there. But because of his mental disability, he didn't recognize that they've been stealing from the boss. He sort of had no idea. But after the surgery and he becomes intelligent, he sees them stealing. Now he's faced with the huge inside battle within himself as to whether or not to snitch on his colleagues. And you find that being intelligent in some ways comes with the responsibility of really making tough decisions. Because if he chooses to snitch on them, he loses the friendship potentially. And if he doesn't, he in some ways is complicit in the act of them stealing by just being aware of it and not choosing to report them. So yeah, this is something that the book explores, I think, in more ways than this particular example. But I thought this particular example is just a short way to like sort of touch on this topic that I think the book talks about. Like, there's a responsibility that you get with the amount of smartness that you have. So I think when you're smart, you have a little bit of responsibility to leave the world in a better place, as opposed to wasting it. Yeah. I think the next thing I'd like to talk about is like emotional intelligence and how important it is. So Charlie does get a higher IQ at some point in the book. I've said this like a million times. But however, the surgery couldn't give him emotional intelligence. So even though he had an IQ of a man, because of the mental disability, even after the surgery, he still had the emotional intelligence of like a young kid. And sort of says that, not says, but sort of like um, argues in some way that when a high IQ exists in isolation without like some emotional intelligence to like temper it, or like human affection to balance it out, this person could find themselves acting like a child or an asshole. I mean, I feel like in my life as well, I've met people who I would consider to be way smarter than I am, struggle with this as well. Because of how smart they are, they sort of get frustrated when people around them don't grasp things in the same way that they can. And this makes them feel, I don't know, angry in some ways, and they sort of like take this out on the person. And I find that this doesn't exactly make for a good relationship or friendship with this particular person, because they sort of don't have the patience to deal with people who are not as smart as they are, and it sort of like takes a bit of emotional intelligence or like empathy to sort of like understand that not everyone is going to be as smart as you. So yeah, I think the book presents the idea that intelligence alone is not like sufficient for a fulfilling and balanced life. Um, Sort of like calls you or me, the reader, to reflect on like the significance that emotional connection and empathy could make in our lives, because you could strive to have a higher IQ, but that doesn't necessarily translate to you being a better person overall. Even though, I mean, this is all subjective, but like, where's that noise coming from? Anyways, this is all subjective, but yeah, I think that was just like an important point that the book touched on. The next thing is, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. The idea that should Charlie be grateful for the surgery? Um, yeah, it was something I thought about while reading the book. If I were to be given the choice of getting super smart for a brief period, but the potential danger of being more mentally disabled than I initially was, would I take it? Again, this question is not one that is immediately obvious to me. What would be the best option, one way or the other? Um, because in the book, the way it plays out, it sort of gets hinted that with the surgery, um, it would last for a brief period, and Charlie Gordon could potentially get a lot more mentally disabled than initially was. So I was asking my question, well, is it all worth it? Does he gain anything meaningful from just that brief moment of him being super smart? Um, are those experiences really worth anything if he doesn't get to remember them? Yeah, I think this is a really like important question to ask. Like, how important are memories? Like, if you could experience something right now, and I told you that you're never going to remember that you experienced it, no matter how um, enjoyable the experience was, would you take it? Especially if it means that you could be, I don't know, you could have like negative impacts down the line. Um, yeah, so I thought like that was a really interesting question to ask. I guess you could also look at it from the point of view of not being selfish, right? So we don't live in isolation. We live with other people around us as well, and there are some positives to be gotten from the fact that he impacted the lives of the people around him in the brief moments that he was super smart, and in the brief moments that he was able to like interact with them on their level. He fell in love, brought love to people's lives. He also got super smart, so he was able to leave some important scientific research in the world. Um, so yeah, maybe in that way it was worth it in some sense. But you could also argue that he might have left the people he had relationships with in a worse position because, well, they got to experience love with him, and now they have to experience him going back to being mentally disabled. Um, yeah, I don't know how that could work for them mentally. I feel like that could be like torturing to have to love someone so much and then just slowly watch them go back to being mentally disabled and not even being able to remember, I don't know, lots of things that you shared with them. I thought that was really sad and like really made me think. The last point is the idea of rereads. Well, this is not something that is I found particularly from inside the book, but it's just something I thought about because of the book. So I've been doing lots of rereads this year, and it's something I didn't exactly like to do. So I sort of have this thing where I feel like there's so many books in the world and that I would not get to read. So I just don't like there's a cost to rereading something that is you're not reading the millions of books that are out there that you're never going to finish reading anyways. And you're wasting time reading something that you've already read when you could be shortening down that list of millions of books by one. Um, yeah. So that being said, I joined a book club here, and there's been a couple of book club picks that have been rereads. Turns out that they've been rereads because I suggested them to the club, and because I like these books to be fresh in my mind when we get to discuss them, I find myself having to reread them again. And so yeah, this book was one of them. I don't even know if I mentioned that this is my second time of reading the book. Um, but yeah, I bring this up because I was surprised by how much I enjoyed reading this, especially since I already knew the story. I mean, it's a really well written book, and especially with the short chapters and the diary entry style to the book, it was like a fast paced book. And yeah, my experience doing rereads, I've done a couple of them this year, hasn't been as bad as I thought it would, to be honest. There's this feeling of it sort of being like you hanging out with your old friends again, especially if they're books that you enjoyed. And I'm really enjoying it. I think I'll probably do this more with books that I loved without having to be prompted by it being a book club pick. I don't know if anyone else out there feels the same thing or feels the same with doing rereads as well. But yeah, just something I felt while reading this book. Anyway, to wrap it up, I think it's a really popular book, loved by lots of people. You don't have to take it just from me, because if millions of people like it, I think there has to be something good about it. I also think it was well written. Talks about some really important themes, some stuff that I was thinking about a lot that I've actually shared in the video. Um, so yeah, also I think I mean, I know that there are some people who didn't like it or not as much as I did. In particular, I know that there were some who didn't like the way that Charlie Gordon's character sort of like developed after he had the surgery. Uh, because he got smarter and he still didn't have like emotional intelligence, like I said. So he became a bit of a prick. I know that some people didn't like this, but I personally didn't have any problems with it at all. I actually thought it was realistic the way it was portrayed. But yeah, so that might be something to consider. Not everyone liked it. There are some people who don't, and for pretty valid reasons, I would say, at least to them. Um, Also, I feel this is not always the case, but something I found is that short chapters in books are really engaging, and they like tend to be like better paced. Um, I think because of like the fact that the chapters are short, it tends to limit the amount of fat in the book or fats that the book could potentially have. Like for example, like I find that in some books when they do the whole flashback thing, it sort of like takes you out of the main thread of the story and like it takes you on another tangent and you're wondering like I mean I don't care about this flashback. I mean it might be important to the story, but it takes you off track a bit and it's just boring. But like in this book, there were flashbacks, but like I feel like they went straight to the point, and I think maybe the fact that the chapters were too short has something to do with that. I feel like there's also a brevity to the book that makes it more memorable in the sense that like I felt like when I had to drop it for a while, it was so easy to pick it back up without like feeling like I had lost track of the story too much. Obviously, I have like no data to back this up about like whether short chapters are better than long chapters, but I just feel like I've read books with a few books with short chapters recently, not recently, um, and yeah, I find that like I feel like I enjoyed the fast, not enjoyed well because I actually enjoy some books that have long chapters, but I mean, I think that I guess the whole point is just that I think that they are faster paced. I think is what I was just trying to say. But anyways, that's it. It's sci-fi, well, but it's not like a space opera or like hard sci-fi or cyberpunk type thing. Um, it's really grounded in the real world, and most of the science stuff in it is just like related to medicine. Yeah. So I actually think it's like really accessible and would recommend it to anyone really. You probably have heard about the book, I think, because like I've said millions of times, it's really popular. But yeah, would totally recommend. And yeah, I think I'm getting a bit long-winded now, talking too much. So yeah, I'll just end it. That's it from me. I'll go away now, and I'll catch you in the next one soon, hopefully. Bye.